Hello, and welcome to the Cybersecurity and COVID-19 webinar from S.i.Systems. Thank you for taking the time to join us. We know you're very busy and appreciate you spending your time with us. My name's Leonie Tyler, and I am the COO at S.i.Systems, and I'll be the host for today's call. I'm very pleased to be joined by cybersecurity expert Lawrence Dobranski, founder of Catalone IT Security. Lawrence has provided cybersecurity expertise to the federal government, large telco companies, and universities. I'm very grateful he's taken the time to be with us today. Also with us is Neal Braaten. He's our head of IT. He's the director of IT at S.i.Systems. Neal was previously the program manager and IT integration at Repsol, formerly Talisman Energy, and he was accountable for enabling secure infrastructures and key systems across North America and Europe. And I'm really pleased that these gentlemen are joining me today, and we're going to be looking at what has transpired from the pandemic and the risks that are being faced from our current work from home environments. Before we start, I'd just actually like to talk about a couple of housekeeping items. Today, the video and audio for attendees has been disabled. It's typically what happens during a webinar. But we do have the Q&A section is enabled. And if you have any questions, please type them in to the Q&A feature at the bottom on the screen. And we'll answer as many questions as we can as we go through the webinar itself, or we'll also look to answer some at the end if we have too many questions during the seminar itself. So with that, I'd actually like to welcome both Lawrence and Neal. These are very interesting times for us, and thank you for joining me today to talk about this topic. Thank you for joining, Lawrence.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. And Neal, thanks for joining me again on webinars internally and externally now for our clients. So Lawrence, I'm actually going to just jump straight in and ask my first question to you. So what's happened in the world with COVID, and how did organizations and societies shift?
COVID, I used to like to look for what are called destructive events or disruptive technology. And the COVID-19 and what it's doing to society and our need for technology is a very, very good example of that. I can still remember on March 13th, the panic that was at one of my clients as they realized by Monday they would have to be virtual if they were continue to survive it as an organization. They were not even thinking at that point about sustainability, but the ability to continue to provide the services to their customers, and to ensure that they as an organization could survive, drive up shareholder value, maintain revenue, and move forward into this vast unknown. That is the big change. And in the process, COVID-19 is discovering all the things that we have known in IT that weren't really quite correct and needs some time and effort. And now we're trying to do it at a very rapid speed to continue the viability of our organizations, to make sure that we keep our employees working as much as possible and deliver the services to to our customers and shareholders.
Mm-hmm. I know here at S.i.Systems, we went from having some of our account executives working remotely some of the time to in a day and a half, all of our employees in Canada and also in India, we went to 100% working from home. So I know that was something that actually happened for us. As we went through, and it was fortunately Neal and his team had done a great job of preparing us for that, but the rush to do that was something I think we and all of our clients will experience as well. So my next question for you on that is, you know, as this has happened and as everybody's moved to this work from home, remote work, what are the cybersecurity risks that we're facing because of this?
The risks are many faceted. You know, the virtualization of the workforce is tremendous. We've got people in self-isolation and remain home directors. We're now starting to see those relaxed, although we have to be prepared for a potential second wave in the fall. What I've really noticed that one of the largest risks is that firms have consequently accelerating their adoption of work-at-home technologies and web-based services. Organizations that would never have considered it have now adopted it. And that is, besides the risk of just the adoption, it's also attracted the attention of malicious actors. Mm-hmm. And when you couple that, you know, we've got large numbers of organized malicious groups looking at technologies to see what they can exploit and how they can effectively, you know, make money or achieve their perhaps their socio-economic or political goals. One example that I like using for that is Zoom. Everyone hopped on Zoom as the technology to do, like we are today, this networking collaboration. And out of a sudden, all of these security issues that were in Zoom made the news. And as a result, I've heard it described as a dream and a nightmare in one technology. But in reality, because they've gotten so much focus on them, they've actually taken up the challenge of improving their security quite remarkably. When we look at the Zoom instance, and I believe we even have some people that couldn't attend today because they're not allowed to use Zoom. Mm-hmm. They focused on it, and Zoom actually did not have any malicious malware type penetration, but people could what we call Zoom bomb. They could actually show up on a webinar like this and hijack it, or look at get the invitation list and other controls. As consequently, Zoom has put in some major security rework, which has really, really improved it. However, the rework has, we're now having to learn about it. I was having a Zoom call with a senior client, and she didn't realize she was being put into a waiting room, and I had to allow her in before she could connect. So it's understanding the technologies, which is another major, major security risk. But we have to be adaptable to get that sustainability and survivability.
Right. So your opinion of Zoom right now is obviously we're using it now. I think you've told me that you use it as a platform to communicate with your clients. Is it something you would recommend using?
I am a firm believer in peer review. It has been looked at very extensively, but a lot of different folks, and that usually results in the product being much more secure. There are other commercial platforms out there, but you just have to have the confidence. Now, Zoom, with its security features, you have to take the time to understand its settings and the options because of their response. They've brought some very, very good talent on board, and they're making security almost their priority. So that's one reason why I have adopted it. But like any technology, I think what is going to be discussed and what are the issues and risks and whether or not it would be appropriate.
Yeah, that's great because, you know, I know when we were looking at setting this up, and Neal and his team worked with me very closely as to the configuration around it. So understanding, you know, the secure features, and I was actually quite impressed with some of the things. And even when we send the link out after this session, there'll be a password that comes with it for the link. It's not just accessible to everybody. So I've seen some of that myself. So
yeah, and Lawrence, you mentioned you know, when you put the focus on, you know, whether it's a piece of technology or a process, we tend to, um, you know, develop it in a way that, provides additional value, higher level of security. Did you find business continuity procedures that a lot of companies needed to revisit those as part of this this rapid transformation?
Very much so. One client I'm working with, they're actually having an online discussion forum for people to post lessons learned about business continuity as they start moving forward to business resumption, because they caught some things that they never thought about or planned for. Another client, they never had the physical folks talk to the IT folks to the extent they did, except for preparing for COVID business survivability. So it's starting to get everyone to understand that the business needs the survivability and sustainability has a lot of different issues from a continuity perspective. And there are business drivers, there's technology drivers, and you have to take a look at them. And one thing that surprised me yesterday, with a potential client, when I realized that they've never had a tabletop exercise to try out their business continuity plan. So they've written it, put it on the shelf, but never tried it. And things like that are starting to come out. We're talking about what is COVID-19 exposed. It's the need for that type of hands-on.
Yeah. So talking about the exposures, we've got some things on the screen here that are around the risks we're facing because of this, and it's around the technology drivers of shadow IT. Would you like to talk to us a little bit about what's happening in the shadow IT space?
Well, the shadow IT has always been a problem in organizations. And for those people not familiar with the expression, this is when you have empowered managers that realize that they need a tool or service for their team, and they go out and procure it. Sometimes they do this to meet a valid business need, but they may not realize they have significant exposures and the effect of that. And the procurement can range from putting a server under a desk or to buying an online service in the cloud that is used by their team to deliver certain services. For the IT purists on the webinar, I've seen people subscribe to some of these large source code repositories in the cloud, and nobody knows except the development team that they're using it. So they've moved all the development source code of the organization to the cloud, perhaps without consulting with the business and physical and legal aspects of the company. And that's a good example. And what happens is you jeopardize implementation and risk mitigation because the idea of getting things done quickly.
Right.
And Lawrence, did you see an increase in shadow IT as a result of COVID and the shift from working more mobile?
Yes, on two aspects. First of all, some companies don't provide a remote laptop or PC. So individuals have to provide their own. So in a sense, they have shadow IT, like who's patching it, who's maintaining it and configuring it. And I've also seen it, for example, in a sales function. They went out and they grabbed, I can't remember whether it was Microsoft or Google's cloud services to get those tools in the cloud. Again, it's there, and a lot of times you don't know it's there until you start looking for it or something goes wrong.
Yeah.
One thing too, they believe that they'll do the free version, and as I keep on telling people, it's not free. They're mining your data, and the minute they're mining your data, that means they could be extracting confidential information from your data, and you have to be concerned with that.
Great. And we also spoke about some data sovereignty issues because of this. Can you talk to us about some of that?
Oh, definitely. Depending on the province you live in Canada, there are different provincial privacy regulations about personal identifiable information and where it is hosted. Some provinces have are very concerned about that data going into the cloud and being held in jurisdictions that don't have the same level of controls and respect for that personal data. So that's a compliance issue that many organizations sometimes are not aware of. You know, if you hop on, grab the cloud service, your data could be anywhere in the world, in a different jurisdiction with different legal issues surrounding it. And that could have both legal liability and potential loss of trade secrets or intellectual property.
Mm-hmm. And any other increased risks because of what we're seeing here?
Yes, definitely. One that I've kind of talked about, the protection of home networks. So it's not this, we have a company, and this goes back to Neal's questions from a business continuity thing. Oh yeah, we've had an issue at work, you're going to have to work at home for a week. We've got everyone at home now. We've got schools are closed, so we've got students, both grade school, high school, and university, now at home on the home network. And so you've got that home network. Is it as strong as the corporate network? Is it protected? Is the hardware being used sanctioned? Is it being patched? And it also means the volume of phishing attacks can go up and cyber attacks. You're now getting emails from colleagues that are perhaps coming from a Gmail or a Hotmail or similar type of email, and it could actually be a phishing attack. Is it the real email or not? Do you trust the link or don't trust the link? I spoke to a head of development, and his panic was he was moving his developers from relatively hardened development platforms to home. And in a lot of cases now, things were open to the world that weren't at the office. So they missed that, and fortunately they didn't experience anything, but it's that type of an issue. And so again, this thing about COVID-19, it's exposing things. We're doing things to survive that we never thought we would do so quickly. I work with a large Government of Canada ministry of almost 40,000 people, that we went from no Office 365 to full Office 365 in security in about 2 weeks. And when you think about what that represents and getting a large organization to respond, and the minute you do things at that speed, there are risks and you have to be cautious of them and accept them as you move forward. But that comes down is providing the service, that availability issue, more important perhaps than confidentiality and making the decision appropriately.
And Lawrence, you touched on home networks there and mentioned also that, all employees are working from home. And perhaps that also means many other, a spouse or children are home. Does that introduce any additional risks into the home network? And does that introduce any additional risk into the company which you're working for?
It can. And that is why it's important to make sure that certain controls are put into place and you think about those issues. Hopefully everyone's using VPN technology, whether they're going to their school, university, or workplace. But out of a sudden, we've got a higher volume of use, so there's a bandwidth risk. What happens if you lose your internet service at home? What happens to that being able to work, study, or even provide entertainment and survive this shelter in place and the mental health load that's going on? So there are many different risks that come from that. One of the things that I worry about is the increased attack surface that now presents to a malicious actor. We have a developer that runs out into a public GitHub, downloads a package because they're doing development, but they don't realize they're being tracked by their IP. And now they've become a target and they get attacked. And that's a modus operandi we're starting to see now. So it's increased risk, and you also get into conflicting security requirements. When one organization wants to push a security policy out to a desktop, which doesn't align with everyone else in the household. And we're starting to see that as organizations, start to, we've gotten survivability. We're looking at an 18-month probably window of sustainability until we can, get an antiviral agent of some sort. So we're now starting to move there, and organizations are starting to look at these things, and we're getting conflicts. So it's an interesting challenge. And how do you satisfy two different security policies for maybe 3 or 4 different organizations?
I'm just going to jump in and ask a couple of questions here, because a few have come up, and the first one I think I can actually answer as well, is I was able to access this webinar with just the link, and it didn't require that they enter a password. How's that possible given the purported security in Zoom? So this, I know when Neal and his team set this up for me, we actually went through and we set this webinar up with an embedded password into the link. And so only people that were registering would be sent that. Was there anything else that's my version of that, Lawrence?
Your understanding is exactly every person on Zoom gets an individual embedded link password.
Wonderful.
And,
okay.
And you see that is actually well engineered security. I think there's a comment in there: don't share the link.
Yeah.
And that is why not to share the link.
Great. There's another question that's said that Lawrence has stated that hopefully people are using VPN technology. What about VDIs?
Virtual desktops, yes, a very important technology both in the office and remotely. However, it does drive up your need for a very good quality internet access solution. And we were talking, Neal asked about risks. Most people have great download speeds, but their upload speeds aren't that greatest. And if you are having multiple VDIs, you can sometimes get into collisions, and there are challenges in that regard. But it is a very appropriate technology to look at and assess the risk and see if it's required. I am a big fan of these I like giving developers and the IT admin folks VDIs into the corporate business side, because it means I can give more freedom on the desktop that they need to do their job. So they're a great solution. And, like everything else, there's pros and cons. And if you engineer it properly, an excellent way to combat specific risks.
And Lawrence, does that also help us with data sovereignty? In the fact that the data never actually leaves perhaps a country that you're using a VDI to access?
Exactly. But then you get into the problem. I talked about the large Government of Canada ministry that I'm working with. I believe they had 800 VPN terminations when they first went out to COVID. And I can't say the size of the organization because it will identify it. Needless to say, that was nowhere near the number of connections we needed. Now that we fixed that, we're now standing up VDIs. So that means the data is still in the data center of the organization. The data is not even leaving the organization in Ottawa. It is there in their data center, which to me is the ultimate data sovereignty. Data hasn't left home. It's just the image on the screen. So it's a very good point.
Great.
And further down data sovereignty, because we have a great question around encryption of data as it integrates with identity management, et cetera. Does encrypted data leave, if encrypted data leaves a country, yet it's encrypted, does that still adhere to data sovereignty rules?
Yes and no. It's one of those typical security answers. Encryption of data is great. However, how are the keys managed? And that becomes the question you have to ask. Data is encrypted and properly encrypted, and the keys are properly stored. Technically, it can go anywhere. But I worry about the key management, and can it be exposed and exploited? And is it really not non-breakable?
Great. Okay, so there's one more question's come in as well. Is there any advice to improve security awareness during COVID-19 and working from home in general?
You know, I'm glad somebody asked about awareness, and I want to thank the individual that asked. Actually, it's a segue for our next slide.
Okay, so why don't I jump into the next slide then, and then so the next question for us here is, what are the things that can be done to mitigate the risk?
And the first one is awareness and education. And I have been doing this for far too long, since about 1986. And the thing that is always consistent is the need for good awareness and education. So when people have to make a decision on their data and whether they trust what they're doing or not, that ties back is to their understanding of what information is critical for the business, how it should be safeguarded, and what they're doing it is appropriate to that. But you know, we're very good about awareness and education in our physical lives, but sometimes we don't move that to our virtual lives very much. And sometimes we have attitudes that bias ourselves to how we react in this way, or we make assumptions. One thing that I was told when I was teaching a class a few years ago on risk management, there was an individual there, and she said to me, you know, when I go to a strange city traveling alone as a woman, I even look at the restaurant I'm going to have dinner with, and sometimes I'll order in food. And then she said, but you as a guy, you don't worry about it. You just go find a pub. And that's the attitude. We have to adapt what she was talking about, understanding the risk, what things we can do to safeguard ourselves, and to make sure that we don't put information or ourselves further at risk. Education is so critical. I mean, this covers privacy, information security, and even the technology that we use. I got bit this yesterday by myself. I didn't realize that in Office 365, when you start typing an email address, if it matches to another subscriber in the cloud, it will present that as an option. I actually sent an email to the wrong client because of that, because the names were so similar and I was rushing. That shows that it doesn't matter your experience level. Awareness and education and being able to make sure you don't make inadvertent mistakes like that is so critical.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Neal.
I was going to say, Lawrence, you know, on the topic of awareness and education, if you were to, we saw, for example, phishing increase over 600% as a result of just COVID over the last few months. And, you know, so we proactively, you know, initiated a program internally in our organization to address that. But if you were to look at, you know, just the topics around awareness and education, what are some of the topics that you would think would be most critical in a time like right now?
Understanding what information is critical to the business, understanding what individual responsibilities are between, you know, privacy and information, and being willing to ask someone for guidance if they're not sure. The risk to have organizations survive, and I think we're through the critical rapid response and we're moving to sustainability. We have to take a deep breath and understand about the potential implications. I heard a story where a company, they sent someone out to Staples, they bought the biggest USB sticks and they dropped one on everyone's desk and they said, copy everything you need, you're working from home on Monday. Sounds like a great solution, but who knows where those machines were going. You know, what would have been a better approach, and taking some time to think about it. And the best thing I find in those circumstances is to ask somebody else, to get a group opinion on it before you make those type of decisions, because you're attempting to ensure survivability. You may actually impact long-term sustainability because of the decision that you made.
Mm-hmm. And I think when we were talking about this earlier, you know, when we were preparing for talking today, one of the things was it's not just awareness and education, although what's really important is your end user, but it's also within your IT organizations. Yeah.
Oh, very much so. And within the IT organization, sometimes different groups take care of issues, and the IT people assume certain things. You know, they're suddenly at home where they may not have the protections they had on the desktop in the office. Mm-hmm. Making sure they understand that they shouldn't be doing testing and development with a live data set. They should be creating, you know, one that doesn't have all the corporate contacts in it, and understanding those things and providing ways to make sure that they can think twice before they go out and do it. Like I've talked about grabbing something off a public GitHub rather than the source code repository in the company. Making sure that if you're following an agile process, that your release method and your promotion to next levels, maybe you're using a Scrum type technique, you still follow through it, although you're working virtually. Still keep the discipline up.
Mm-hmm. So that's going into process and some compliance, and I think there's some hardware compliance issues as well that we need to be making sure patches are in place. Can you talk about what continuous compliance should look like in this environment?
Continuous compliance is something that I think it should be done specifically in our current environment, but always. And for those not familiar with it, it's a methodology where you ensure that you're patched current, that any known vulnerabilities have been mitigated, and that you're in a secure configuration. And you have to do that not ideally. I like some of my best clients do this once a night on their entire server farm. And they've moved it up on their desktops. After Microsoft Patch Tuesdays, they come back out and they do it on every desktop. And that's a continuous security review process that you put in place. You know, a wash, rinse, repeat. Check to make sure you're patched current. If a system suddenly hasn't been patched, you make sure you open a ticket, you go check it out and find out why it didn't get patched. Known vulnerabilities are taken care of for it. Is it still in the secure configuration? Also understand what your regulatory responsibilities are, and sometimes these are contractual. Is information that you've been entrusted with, are you properly safeguarding it? Can you demonstrate that you took due diligence and due care? If you're processing credit cards, are you meeting your PCI requirement with the people in your call center working from home now, not working from a call center, for example? Are you meeting what you have decided, what have you warranted to do to your issuing bank in the case of PCI? Also, you should take the time, now that we can take a bit of a breath, to evaluate the changes that you have made in your system for that survivability, making sure that you haven't inadvertently introduced a security vulnerability, and moving forward in a way that it's sustainable and fixing things and getting things done. Another thing I'm a big fan of is penetration testing new configurations. And that starts with simple port scanning, scanning for the vulnerability level, making sure that there's no vulnerabilities in place, make sure applications and desktops and servers are patched current, because that system may suddenly be on a home network where it doesn't sit behind the intrusion detection and other tools that it would if it was still at the office.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so what about data as we move down into the data management?
Well, one thing I got reminded of this week, backups. They don't go away because you've gone virtual. Make sure that you have I don't like using the word a backup strategy, by the way. I call them data recovery strategies. Don't exercise your backup, exercise your data. Recovery strategy. I have clients that they thought they had a data recovery strategy and they tried to do a backup restore, and guess what they found out? Mm-hmm. They did not have a backup strategy. So I like emphasizing the data recovery strategy. And this comes back to something else that's a real part of the awareness and education. And, for the IT team's ability to learn, respond, and adapt, nothing replaces a desktop exercise. Great team building event. Try something. See how it works. See what you learn. You're in IT. Have you ever met the privacy officer? How do you identify a privacy breach? And who runs physical security? You know, like making sure people have contacts and they know each other, start building a better team. As we go virtual, having that familiarity is going to be very, very critical.
And so when we come to like our identities, our online identities, and access to these systems, what do you recommend in this regard?
Well, identity management, I think, is one of the biggest Achilles heels that we all face. We all have too many entities to manage, too many passwords. But passwords are very easily guessed. I am positively amazed how, with the computing horsepower we have on our desktops, how quickly a brute force attack can be launched. They have to be deployed properly, managed securely. I know everyone complains if they get it wrong 3 times, they kick you out for 30 minutes before you can get back in. Those are very, very critical. And the thing I can't emphasize more, good password hygiene. Don't share a password. Get one of these password safes, or there's one on the Apple phones to store individual strong passwords for every application. Very critical. And if you don't have that in an organization, you should be looking at a strong identity management strategy and how to do it, and making sure that and this is why passwords is what people call it, but really what we're talking is identity management and making sure it's done securely. The other thing is 2-factor authentication. 5 years ago, it wasn't very well understood. Now it's starting to show up in a lot of use places. Facebook has it. Many of us don't have it turned on. Same with LinkedIn. You should perhaps be turning it on and getting the experience with it. For those not aware, they have there's a little utility on your phone that every 30 seconds it generates a 6-digit number that you use as a secondary authentication after your password. This type of technology. Again, I'm a big fan of crawl, walk, run. Put this into place on your critical systems, your critical information. Maybe you do your corporate VPN first. Great start, minimizes the risk. And then maybe you start looking at critical pieces of information. Another thing, since we have a large IT audience, I'm a big fan of system password managers, critical IDs, some type of centralized password repositories for all your servers. It just amazes me the number of organizations that have shared admin credentials across their data centers. Yeah. You know, we have to move to the point where there's individual ones and users check it in and check it out. A little bit more onerous, but ensures survivability.
Thanks.
Well, Lawrence, I was going to say, Lawrence, what I'm hearing here is there's a significant amount of work that we should be looking at all of these categories, more so as a result of the pandemic and our workforce working more remote. What are your thoughts on how to do that? Is that something we look internally to do? Should we be partnering with the business, trusted vendors? What are your thoughts on that?
I am a fan of, the vendor will sell you a product and know how to install it, but I always get a sober second thought from a large scale firm such as S.i.Systems, because if you're a law firm, for example, a large Canadian law firm, I don't think you can afford to buy the good IT support necessary to deliver security and what else you need. If you're going to go install a privileged access management system, that carries a unique skill set that I think through an appropriate business arrangement with an appropriate talent provider is the way to go. Because these are scarce resources. The good ones are hard to get and hard to keep. So you have to trade off with what you do internally and what makes sense to bring in a hired gun to help you through the issue to make sure you've got best practice. addressing that. Also, while you're looking at that, how to do another business driver in there is your cyber risk insurance. Because a lot of time the cyber insurers like it when there's a third party involved because they know they're getting a better talent pool and talent set. Because an awful lot of times IT is done off the side of the desk by someone who's got a primary responsibility but is also good at server admin. And with the level of the sophistication of our attackers, we can no longer afford that approach. You need skilled, competent professionals to do the services.
Mm-hmm.
See, that leaves us really into a survivability issue that we don't talk about a lot. And that is you got to make sure you have the people to keep the IT systems up, that the primary business function is capable of delivering the service to its customers and achieving the revenue and our shareholder value that you're desiring to do. Having that good talent, that's that strange world, new world we live now into. You got to survive and you got to transform to this new way of doing business. I am firmly convinced that we are not going back into the office. I think we're going to see more virtualization, more work from home. When you look at the announcements, Shopify, 100% virtualized going forward. I think it was Twitter is now done the same thing. People forget here in Canada, but during the .com boom, Nortel ran out of space and put about 25% of its people at home. That is going to continue. It's not going away. So start practicing crawling now, and then look at walking and running as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. It's nice, and thanks for the small plug there. It's definitely something we're hearing from our clients already around, everyone did rush to move to this environment, and we're already seeing the demand for people in the cybersecurity infrastructure space. And it's something that we had a specialization in this, but we've put more focus on that within our organization because we're seeing more demand for that. So before we move on to our next question, there was just one question that came in here around what do you think about Vault for enterprise-wide credentials?
I'm not that familiar with Vault to give an opinion, but if my reaction when I'm looking at a new area to find out what's leading, pull out the Gartner report, see where it sets on the Gartner quadrant, and see does it meet your need. So sorry I can't comment on Vault, but I have no experience with it in terms of deployment, so I can't give a good opinion on it. Okay. But the fact that you even will look at one means that you've actually made a major, that's the biggest part of the challenge to realize that you have to do is enterprise-wide credential management. One of the things I want to go back to, we were talking about critical people and what's critical to an organization. Be careful of the hit by the bus problem. I'm not making light of this. If for anyone on the West Coast, they're probably familiar with the Quadriga CX. That is a crypto exchange where the founder was killed, unfortunately, and he was the only person that knew the passwords. So there's $200 million now stuck in cyberspace. So don't lose sight of the company's core business and make sure that the keys to the kingdom are held appropriately, whether they be trade secrets or key passwords. And that is very, very important. Yeah. And we were talking about what you outsource, what you don't. Well, this is the type of risk assessment you have to make, how you entrust it, how you make sure that it's appropriate for the risk tolerance that you and your board has.
Mm-hmm. And so I think we've covered some really great topics here. So really, what is it that our clients need to be focusing on now? Like, what do we need to be looking at now?
Well, there's a couple of things. Business continuity, we're still in that mode. And you need resources and talent. You got to put together some type of a project pipeline with talent, budget, and technologies that make sense. Don't do a helter-skelter procurement of From the IT folks, you got to become a partner with the business early on. Understand what is the new normal from the business perspective and how you're going to get there as an organization. And above all, security and privacy is not something you worry about just before you go live. It's part of the original requirements capture, and it's factored into the business planning cycle. So those are kind of the high-level governance issues. But from a technologist point of view, I'll give you 5 things to think about for the techies in the crowd. Use VPNs. There's a lot out there. Look at one, and that has a tremendous return on the investment. Next one is be wary of phishing attempts. We were talking about the massive explosion, and with the fact that you're getting emails from people that you may not recognize, but they seem they're right. Call them up, text them, have an out-of-band channel to get out to them, make sure, did you send that email? Do you really want me to transfer that $50 million? You know, ask those type of questions. Have good desktop firewalls, anti-malware, antivirus. There's a lot on the market. Consult with Gartner which one that suits your organization better from their, and there's some very good ones, but have something. Patch, do continuous compliance, patch your OSs and apps. And the last one is protect your passwords, and don't share them. And I think if you do that, make sure from the IT folks that we have a virtual coffee with the business folks. Hey, I have a client that every second Friday, we have a virtual luncheon between business and IT as part of the business continuity thing. Just getting the people that are doing the heavy lifting around the table, talking about what challenges they're having. Mm-hmm. And, we've got to come up with new ways of doing business in this strange new world.
Yeah. It's interesting when you're talking about the VPNs and the password protection. And as we've been going through this and I've been doing my research, our IT team have also been working very closely with me and with the company, educating the company. And I wasn't aware that the majority of the patches that come down to my devices that I carry around personally the majority of them are to fix security issues. So if I choose not to upgrade and go to the newest version, I'm exposing myself and exposing myself when I'm going into maybe a coffee shop or somewhere that has a free Wi-Fi or an airport, which I seem to do a lot. And so it's about putting a VPN on my own personal devices too. So I think this has been not only an eye-opening situation for everyone, from a business perspective and what we need to do to protect our information internally, but also what do we need to do to protect ourselves and our own identities. And I was as I've been doing my research for this, I also saw that by going onto social media and participating in maybe someone's quiz that they sent me, where was I born, what's my when did I meet my spouse, what's my spouse's name. And these are all things that are actually might be my password recovery process. And really those questionnaires aren't created by my friend, they're created by a hacker somewhere in the system. So, I mean, it's been so much that we can look at we take from everything we've said for our corporations and bring into our own personal worlds as well. So it's I've learned so much from just exploring this of how to protect myself, and I think without becoming paranoid.
It is a balance, and unfortunately though it's getting worse. I have a friend who lost her mom. She posted it on Facebook and she suddenly realized everyone knew who what her maiden name was.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. Yeah.
Through the obituary.
Yeah.
That she was sharing the tragic loss of her mom, and then she realized what the consequence of that. And so that's, your point is right on. The other thing is I get, maybe because I'm in the business I'm in, but I've recently put in a second internet point of presence at home, because if I don't have internet, I can't generate revenue. Mm-hmm. And then for the IT folks on this webinar, does your company have 2 internet points of presence? I'm not trying to, I don't get any kickback from any internet service providers, but it's an interesting question. A little thought experiment to walk yourself through. What would happen if you lost internet, and how long could you be down without it?
Yeah, interesting. So I would like to ask anyone if you have any other questions. Thank you for putting some up as we've been discussing, but if you have any other questions, please type them into the Q&A area, and we'll respond to them in our last couple of minutes. Neal, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think we had a slide here around contact information. Maybe we can review that as we have some questions coming in.
Yeah, so if we could just move to the next slide, then it was, there's some key takeaways here, and so I think you've spoken about some of these, Lawrence.
Yes.
But yeah, so we'll move on to the next one. How were you going to say something there, Lawrence? I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just affirming that, yeah, we had covered the key takeaways.
Yeah. So really, if you need to speak to someone at S.i.Systems, please reach out to your account executive directly to them. They would have been the one that forwarded you the invitation to this webinar with us today. You can also reach out to me directly. My email's on there. It's Leonie Tyler at S.i.Systems.com. So feel free to reach out to me as well, but your account executive would know the day-to-day runnings of your account. I would really like to take this time, just while we see if any more questions come in, to thank you, Lawrence, for joining us today. It's been very informative for me working with you and preparing for this, and I think it's been a very inspirational hour to remind our clients what they might not have been thinking about as we all rush to keep our business alive and to meet the needs of our business partners and our users and our boards, as you mentioned. And I'd just really like to take the time to say thank you to everyone who joined the call as well. This was our first client webinar. We are hoping to do more in different areas of our client's business. So if you've got any recommendations on what you'd like to hear from us, please forward those in as well. And I will be sending out, or through your account executive, we'll be sending out a link to this webinar. As I mentioned earlier, it will have a password. You can forward that to other people, and they could watch this as well in case there's something that you found very beneficial that you might want to share with a business partner or someone else in your organization. So is there anything either of you, Lawrence, you'd like to say in closing? What would be the one piece of advice that, if there was one thing that you told our clients to go back and check on, what would that be?
Go meet your peer in business and understand what's keeping them up at night. And see if you can translate that into the services you provide as the IT person.
Great, thank you. That's a wonderful piece of advice. And Neal, is there anything from you?
I would say something very similar. Shadow IT is a big risk. Without having IT as part of that process, it's a big risk. So more reason to interact with the business and understand the direction that the business is looking to move in, and partnering in that exercise.
Great. Well, thank you once again, both of you, and thank you everyone for joining the call, and I look forward to hosting you again in the future. Thank you.